The old house loomed on the hill. It was once grand, I'd heard. Now it was just decrepit. Vines clung to its crumbling facade like skeletal fingers. Windows, once bright, were now dark eyes staring out at the world. The iron gates were rusted, groaning as I pushed them open. Why had James asked me to meet him here? The lawn was overgrown, weeds twisting around my ankles like grasping hands. A chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else. Something vaguely unsettling. As I walked towards the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a nightmare. The air grew colder as I approached the front door. Its paint was peeling, revealing the rotting wood beneath. I raised my hand and knocked. The sound echoed through the house, seeming to reverberate endlessly. Silence. For a moment I considered turning back, but James was my friend, and something in his voice had hinted at urgency. I knocked again, louder this time. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the slow, heavy sound of footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. A man stood in the doorway, his face obscured by shadows. He was tall and imposing, dressed in a dark suit that seemed at odds with the decaying grandeur of the house. He looked me up and down, his expression unreadable. "You must be here for the party," he said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped aside, gesturing me inside. The house was even more unsettling on the inside. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and dust lay thick on the once ornate furniture. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. It smelled faintly of cinnamon? Strange. The hallway opened into a grand ballroom. It was brightly lit, the chandeliers sparkling despite the grime that coated them. A strange assortment of people milled about, their laughter echoing through the cavernous space. They were all dressed in their finest attire, men in tailored suits and women in shimmering gowns. They looked out of place against the backdrop of decay. Their conversations were hushed, their laughter strained. There was an air of forced gaiety that did little to mask the underlying tension. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see a woman with heavily painted eyes and a nervous smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice a little too loud. "Enjoy the party." Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for something, or someone. I'd received the call just that afternoon. James, his voice tight with urgency, almost a whisper. "Meet me," he'd said, "at the old Blackwood Manor. Top of the hill, you can't miss it. It's important." He hadn't explained why, hadn't offered any details. Just that name, Blackwood Manor. The place had a reputation, haunted, some said. Others whispered of strange rituals, even stranger residents. I dismissed it as local superstition. Until now. I tried calling him back, of course. No answer. Just a cold, empty tone that sent shivers down my spine. James wasn't the type to play games. Something was wrong. I could feel it. So here I stood, in this crumbling mansion, surrounded by strangers. Where was James? What was he mixed up in? A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I needed to find him. Needed to know he was all right. But the guests, with their forced smiles and vacant eyes, offered no answers. They moved like ghosts, their conversations a low murmur that did little to break the oppressive silence. I was starting to feel a bit overwhelmed. This whole situation was bizarre, even for James. I needed a drink. I spotted a bar set up in the corner, manned by a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a film noir. He was stout, with a neatly trimmed mustache and a cigar clenched between his teeth. Smoke curled upwards, forming a halo above his head. He caught my eye and gestured me over with a tilt of his head. "Well now," he boomed, his voice surprisingly deep. "You look like you could use a little something." He didn't wait for a response, instead grabbing a crystal glass and filling it with a crimson liquid from a cut glass decanter. The drink shimmered under the chandeliers, catching the light like a ruby. It smelled sweet, with a hint of spice I couldn't quite place. I hesitated, unsure what to make of it. "What is it?" I asked, eyeing the drink warily. The man chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that," he said, pushing the glass towards me. "Just a little something to get the party started. Webward's orders." Section 5. A drink of comfort, Webward. The name meant nothing to me, but something about the way the man said it sent a shiver down my spine. Still, I found myself taking the glass. The liquid was cool against my lips, surprisingly smooth as it slid down my throat. It left a warmth in its wake, a tingling sensation that spread outwards from my stomach. I took another sip, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety I'd felt moments ago began to dissipate, replaced by a pleasant drowsiness. The room, which had seemed so oppressive before, now felt strangely welcoming. The music, a melancholic waltz I hadn't even noticed before, now seemed to wrap around me like a comforting embrace. "Another?" the bartender asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The warmth in my stomach was spreading, a comforting heat that chased away the chill of the old house. "Sure," I said, my voice sounding strangely distant to my own ears. "Why not?" The bartender refilled my glass, the crimson liquid sloshing gently. "That's the spirit," he boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Let's get you properly acquainted with the festivities, shall we?" Section 6, Webward's birthday. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's Webward's birthday, you see," he said, his breath hot on my ear. "And Webward loves a good party. Webward again. Who was this Webward? And what did any of this have to do with James?" I opened my mouth to ask, but the bartender cut me off. Now, he chided, wagging a finger at me. "Don't spoil the fun with questions, just relax, enjoy the company. Webward's children are quite particular about their guests." "Children?" My head swam. The warmth from the drink was starting to make me feel lightheaded. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the guests around me blurring at the edges. I blinked, trying to focus. The bartender chuckled again, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "That's the good stuff," he said, winking. "Just a little something to loosen you up. Webward likes his guests. Amenable." His words did little to ease my unease. If anything, they only deepened the mystery. Who was this Webward, and what were his children? I glanced around the room at the guests with their vacant smiles and haunted eyes. Were they the children? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I took another sip of the drink, trying to quell the rising panic. The warmth spread through me, dulling the edges of my fear, but the questions remained, swirling in my head like smoke. "You'll find James upstairs," the bartender said suddenly, his voice low and urgent. "Second door on the left, but be warned, don't go up until you've finished your drink." His words snapped me back to my senses. James, upstairs. Finally, a clue. But why the secrecy? And what was the significance of the drink? I looked down at the crimson liquid swirling the glass gently. It was then that I noticed it. A glint of metal at the bottom. A coin. "A little token," the bartender said, his eyes watching me intently. "To gain you entrance. The man at the stairs. He's expecting it." The man at the stairs. Another piece of the puzzle, another layer of intrigue. This whole situation felt like something out of a fever dream, and yet, here I was, caught in its web. I drained the last of the drink, the coin cold against my lips. The bartender nodded approvingly. "Good lad," he said. "Now, off you go. And don't keep Webward waiting." I stood there for a moment, the coin heavy in my hand. My head spun, the music seeming to press in on me from all sides. But through the haze, one thought remained clear. I had to find James. I clutched the coin tightly, feeling its cool metal against my palm. It was heavier than it looked, etched with strange symbols that I couldn't decipher. A passport to the upper floor, the bartender had called it. To see James, to unravel this mystery. The music swelled, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced around the room at the other guests. They danced and laughed, oblivious to my unease. Or perhaps they chose to ignore it. In this house, it seemed, secrets hung heavy in the air. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Time for answers. Time to find James. I pocketed the coin, its weight a reassuring presence against my leg. The bartender was watching me, a knowing smile on his lips. "Don't worry," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It's all part of the fun. Just remember to wish Webward a happy birthday before you leave." His words echoed in my ears as I turned toward the stairs. Each step I took felt heavy, the weight of the mansion pressing down on me. But with each step, I also felt a surge of determination. I would find James. I would uncover the truth behind this bizarre gathering. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw him, a tall, imposing figure shrouded in shadow. He stood at the end of the corridor, his face obscured by the dim light. He held out a hand, and I saw a glint of metal in his palm. The coin. The music from the ballroom seemed to fade away, replaced by a heavy silence. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, taking a deep breath, I stepped forward into the darkness.